Conversations with GIPR, which is the stock symbol for Generation Income Properties, came about because there are plenty of resources about REITs, net lease properties, and tangential information from people pontificating about the growing industry. But it all started to blur together, and there was little differentiation between the various topics that were being publicly covered by anyone with an internet connection. We haven't seen any podcasts that are hosted by a public net lease REIT that will expose the listener to various concepts that are topical, behind the scenes, and maybe, just maybe, interesting enough to listen to for 30 minutes. So, go wash those dishes, go for your run, or if you're watching by video, get the popcorn, or if you're like me, deep condition your hair, all while listening to Conversations with GIPR.
David Sobelman is the CEO for Generation Income Properties. All opinions expressed by David or any guest of Conversations with GIPR are solely opinions and do not reflect the opinions of the company. Any remarks in this podcast, other than purely historical information, may include forward-looking statements and as such are subject to the risks and uncertainties that are discussed in our SEC filings, and actual results may vary materially from those suggested in any forward-looking statements. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions.
Welcome to Conversations with GIPR. Today, I'm with Michael Phillips, managing partner and co-founder of Loci Capital, and I'm David Sobelman, CEO of Generation Income Properties. Michael, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Michael, I am so glad you're here because I like getting big brains on our podcast,
Yeah.
and I like people with unique perspectives. And the intent here is to hear your position on today's market, learning about what you do, learning about your background, and maybe we'll get into a little bit of how we know each other. So why don't you just go ahead, and this is the time where you have to talk about yourself and try to be as less humble as possible, right?
Okay.
So let's see. Where'd you go to college?
I went to college at Georgetown.
Do you hate saying that?
I don't hate it. I'm proud of it. I liked it. It was fun.
Good. Well, DC is an awesome place.
Yeah, it was. It took me a while to like it.
Right.
Being a Floridian, I pretty much hated it the
Right.
first 12 months until I got used to, gray weather doesn't kill you kind of thing.
That's right. Did you spend most of your college career at the Tombs?
I certainly plenty of it.
For those not from DC, kind of underground bar, Georgetown centric.
Right off campus.
I think there was a movie that referenced it, wasn't it?
Yeah, there was
Right.
a movie they hung out in the Tombs a lot. I'll remember at some point.
Okay.
One of those 80s movies was very popular.
Right.
Not
And
Breakfast Club, but something like that.
Okay, go to Georgetown, studied finance, international.
No.
stuff.
So
Right.
I was in the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown,
Mhm.
and I took about as soft of a course load as you could take from a math standpoint or so. It was called International Culture and Politics.
Uh-huh.
So I did a lot of history, literature, philosophy, a lot of writing.
Was there intent?
Econ, there's plenty of econ, trade, things like that as well.
Was there intent to be a foreign service officer? Was that it? No.
No, I why did I do that? When I was a kid, my parents took us on a couple of trips to Europe and some international trips, and I was always really thought it was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So there's just kind of an interest in the world beyond where I grew up.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be one part of it. The second part is my brother, who's 6 years older than me, had already gone through the same program. So I was just doing whatever he did. It seemed like it worked out well.
That's great.
Yeah. My older, smarter brother. Follow.
Great. Okay, you graduate Georgetown.
Yeah.
You're in one piece,
Yes.
and you survive the traffic, you survive the politics, you survive all of that, and
Yes.
then what?
So I did not follow a normal route. So many of the kids I was in class with did. They went to work for the government. They went into law school. where they went to work on Wall Street. I was far too immature for being organized enough to get a job in any of those places.
Or have any foresight.
Yeah, or have any foresight. So I came back home for a little bit, and then a gentleman that I know that was actually friends with my brother had been spending time in southern Spain and wanted to open a school that taught Spanish to Brits and Germans because he was coming from London all the time to hang out there. So he's like, Mike, how about you go set it up? So I moved to Cadiz, southern Spain, and organized a corporation that taught Spanish to foreigners. Really, all I did was hire people that actually knew what they were doing, and put together the lease and got the space in place. And then I left. So I set it up and left.
Can you speak Spanish?
Un poquito, sí.
Oh, bueno. That's great. That's really cool. Okay. So was that the first lease you ever negotiated and signed?
Yeah, that would be.
That's great. And it was in Spanish.
Yes. We had a lawyer that spoke English. That helped. Yeah.
That's terrific.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you come back to the U.S.
No, I actually moved to Australia for 6 months and surfed. I made some money setting up the Spanish company, and I basically went and spent it all surfing for 6 months. But in the meantime, I read a book on real estate investing, came back and started buying houses.
Cool.
And that's how I got into the business.
Okay.
When I ran out of money.
All right. We're going to go back to that part. Surf your brains out. Then what?
Yeah. Moved back to the States and went into business with a friend of mine. And, we did what a lot of people do. Their first exposure to real estate is you try to buy a house, fix it up and sell it.
Yeah. Right.
A lot of books out there, a lot of people being trained on that kind of stuff, a lot of bad advice out there on that kind of stuff. But we bought a house, fixed it up, sold it, and we made money. The way we were able to buy a house is I still had some leftover money. He had a little bit of money, and we got a loan from mom and dad.
Great.
And mostly we got a loan from the government because in 2002, 3, whenever that was, the government was offering, or not the government, they were effectively backing loans so you could get some pretty high leverage loans. 90% financing, 95% financing was viable. No longer.
Right.
Which is a good thing.
It was like double loans, if I remember correctly. Like there was a mortgage, and then there was a second position after that, or was it all like one giant?
It was just
high
to the
leverage
borrower. It was just one giant loan from Wells Fargo or whatever bank was giving it to you. Yeah, and so we started a business doing that.
Do you even remember reading the loan documents, like knowing?
Of course not.
No, right. Right.
It's not like commercial real estate where you have the ability to negotiate your loan docs. So if you want to buy a house with a residential loan, you are just a market taker.
Sign here. We'll give.
Sign
you're looking
here.
at the dollar amount.
Yeah.
Perfect. That's what I need.
And it's so intimidating. Right. The first time any person buys a house, the number of documents you have to sign, the length of these documents, the density of this verbiage, it's not easy. I'm literate, but it wasn't easy for me either.
Okay, so you buy your first house, you fix it up, and then you sell it, and you're automatically a genius, right? You're like, genius. I know exactly because I read a book.
Yes, I read a book,
and
the book said, "Buy it for less than you can sell it for."
Right. Nailed it. Right.
Yeah.
So what happens after you make money? You start.
Yeah, we started doing more of it.
Right.
We built up a little organization. We ended up hiring people, and we got to the position where the market was very hot as you went from 2002 to 2005. And there were so many people who were interested in buying and fixing houses. We actually just started getting control of houses and selling them to people who wanted to fix them up. So we never even took title, or sometimes we took title for as little as 2 days.
You're flipping a contract.
We started flipping the contracts.
Wow.
We could make roughly 80% flipping the contract that we underwrote that we could make doing all the labor and taking a year's worth of risk. So we sold into that market.
I'm like so excited for you and ashamed of America at the same time.
America got very overheated. I couldn't say it was obvious to us that it was wildly overheated. But it was interesting to me that by the time 2005 kind of rolled around, almost every person I knew was a quote unquote real estate investor. And almost every one of those people had a day job doing something else. And I remember a chiropractor out of Clearwater who bought like 20 properties and was living large and then became, did not do that well.
Bankrupt for those. Yeah. Right.
So there was just a lot of kind of irrational exuberance around it.
Mm-hmm.
We ended up dissolving the company and dividing up all our assets and selling out in the Q1 of 2006. So I believe Q1 of 2006 was the high point in the state of Florida in Case Shiller, and it went down in Q2 or Q3. I can't remember exactly, but very good timing.
Yeah.
Very good timing.
I remember,
say that was all planned timing. Very good timing.
I remember hearing a story one time of someone who, an executive at some large real estate company at that period of time told a story that he went to a restaurant and started chatting up his server.
Yeah,
and
of course, the server had 5 houses.
The server had 9 houses, and he said, now's the time to sell. Sell everything, right? Because that's not how this typically works.
Yeah, it's like the taxi driver was a tech investor in 1999 kind of thing.
Right. All right, great. So you're out of the house flipping business.
Yeah, so the part of that was I got very interested in trying to move into development, so more complex real estate investing. Development is a lot riskier. You have construction, you have entitlement, you have a whole bunch of different types of financial structures around it that are much more complicated than a typical buying house. And I came to the conclusion after investigation that I was likely to lose money because I didn't know what I was doing. So we shut that down. We divided up. My partner went a different direction. I went in the commercial real estate side and went to work for a developer in the Tampa Bay area, building triple net lease retail assets mostly, as well as strip centers. And we did a lot of land entitlement. Housing market was still hot-ish. So we were doing land entitlement work for, we'd take down 150 acres, get it entitled and sell it to Lennar, Deer, or something like that.
Yeah. That's a big shift. So they really gave you your real estate education, your commercial real estate education.
Yeah. So my life has been just a series of, jumping from different teachers, if you will, in education. Some of the first philosophy teaching, besides just my parents, from high school teacher that I had, who was a great English teacher, all the way to, reading a book, to going to work for a well-known development firm here in town, where I had a couple of teachers there who were great people I learned a lot from. And then again, as I moved into private equity and beyond.
That's great. Yeah. So you were a developer. When did you go to grad school?
I went back to grad school. I was a geezer, sometimes, or as I was told, because I was about 30. And nobody goes back to get an MBA at 30, 28, 29 maybe, but usually it's like 26, 27.
Right. You get your 4 years post undergrad. Yeah. That's the traditional time frame.
Yeah. So what happened to me is I had become a partner in that firm and had moved and opened a regional office for them. And the market went through the GFC. And I was in a small market in Birmingham, Alabama. And I had wife and one kid on the way, and started thinking about the, how am I going to grow this in the future? I started thinking Birmingham might be a limiting place to live for the long run. Although it's a great town, I thought it was beautiful. And decided I kind of wanted to go out on my own. And the only way to do our business is very capital intensive, is to go meet people who have money. And all the money in the world is in the Northeast, was my thinking. So I'll go apply to an MBA program in the Northeast, and I'll go meet people with money. So I went back and went to Wharton at University of Pennsylvania. And that's ultimately what ended up happening. I had an interview very early on with the CEO of a private equity fund, and had this incredible experience where he happened to interrupt the meeting for a phone call, and where he was told all about a deal that I already knew about. So he drop on the conversation, and he gets off the conversation, and I'm like, I know that portfolio, and then I start telling him why it's terrible. which he thought it was awesome.
Right.
And then he takes me upstairs. He's like, come with me. So we walk through this, this beautiful office building, and then we walk up this staircase. The staircase is basically 2 stories, about 40 feet worth of glass overlooking downtown Philadelphia. And then we walk in the top. We walk in this conference room again, 40 feet of glass. It's crazy. And he has this guy come in. He says, hey, Michael, tell him what you just told me. I'm like, now I'm on stage.
Right,
I'm talking about how bad it is.
Right.
Little I know the person he had me telling us he was the one who was pitching and trying to get the deal done.
Oh, no. Oh, no. Great. You're like, he's like, who are you?
But, they were both great to me about it. And they had me come in and be kind of while I was in school, they would just send me stuff to work on and analyze. I ended up working for them part-time during school, and then joined it full-time after school.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So back in the big city.
Back into a big city.
Right. Philly is slightly different than DC, right? Every Northeast city, right, starts with DC. Yeah. DC, Philly, New York, Boston, they're all within 8 hours of each other driving, but they're all very different.
Yeah. They're all like a 2-hour train ride.
Right.
From each one next up. Yeah. Or cool. Less, depending on.
So you graduate, you feel like a superstar because this big company has already hired you, essentially. Yeah. And then you go to work for them.
Yes.
Right. Full-time.
Full-time. And full-time was a lot. It was immediately a lot of hours.
So, are you the bullpen analyst who you sit there until 2 a.m. doing deals?
Yeah. Not always 2 a.m, but often that kind of stuff.
3.
Well, I did a summer internship at JP Morgan in their investment bank, and I'd say the hours there were worse.
Oh yeah.
Okay. I also think that the work was substantially less interesting. Or there's a lot of wasted work, making things look pretty, versus actually getting things done. But the hours were bad.
Yeah. And what asset classes were you looking at while you were in Philly?
So that was really just the beauty of the learning curve component of going to work for a firm like that. Is I'd been building CVSs and strip centers and land. And suddenly, some of the first deals I was working on, we were buying apartment complex. Another one was a 1910 built building in Manhattan on Fifth Avenue that we were buying and ripping the studs and repositioning. I also quickly got staffed with the CEO. I came in as kind of work directly with the CEO kind of position on a $3.5 billion LBO of a retail company that we were kind of the real estate arm of the analysis. So it was a little bit of a different experience than flipping houses in Clearwater.
And how much did your time at Wharton help you with your role post Wharton?
Wharton I did not have any real business classes in undergrad. So I was entirely self-trained and book trained. It was useful, especially just accounting.
Right.
Learning how to build and think about the various
the rules.
Parts, financial rules. And I'd say that under the summer internship at JP Morgan itself was more valuable from that standpoint, because I had to build a 3-statement model where you have a fully dynamic model that ties cash flow statements to balance sheet statements to income statements, and suddenly you understand how companies work.
Yeah, that's right.
Which was fascinating.
So I'm always intimidated when I get a big brain in here, because I'm like, okay, I better put on a good show for them and give them the impression I know what they're talking about all the time. Right. So I'm always curious to see how someone's formal education has translated to their professional work.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. The formal education, it's actually was fascinating. Is mostly I took classes and things I just didn't know about. And so I wouldn't say that I became expert in anything while there, but I expanded kind of my base of being an amateur. I'm an amateur at derivatives. I'm an amateur at entrepreneurship. I'm an amateur at all these different things.
Right.
And there was value to that.
Yeah. Okay. So it's
also an amazing network that comes out of that school. My goodness.
It's shocking, right? Like if you can get in, that's the vetting process. You are smart enough to get in. You work hard enough. You know how to have a conversation.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you get some education and you learn how to communicate with some of the people who have the brightest minds.
So one of the coolest things they made me do, and they make everybody do, I have a fear of public speaking. I've always been uncomfortable. But they force you to do public speaking in a video in front of a crowd, but also videoing yourself. It's a whole class you take for a semester, and you're doing it over and over again. And when you have a video watching yourself in the public speaking, you start realizing, man, I don't look as dumb as I think I do. Like, it's not that bad. I mean, I'm clearly nervous, but like, who cares?
Yeah, that's right. I mean,
there's some real value just in that little bit.
That's right, because they're grooming the leaders, right? Yeah. They're grooming the future leaders of the business world, the commerce world, and I too, I shy away from media attention. Typically, I don't like being the center of attention. I feel like I can do so much more by just kind of being, smart and communicate with our team and, make statements like a CEO is supposed to. Yeah. But, put me up in front of a room just because I want to is not me at all. Yeah. It's not you either, clearly. Yeah.
No, it makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah. So how...
Part of my job now, though.
Let's get into Loci.
Yeah.
Tell us what's in the name.
What is the name? So Loci is Latin for places. My partner and I, Patton Chalura, we both went to Penn. Patton was smart enough to go to Penn undergrad. So he's a Wharton undergrad. I was grad school. If you're a Wharton person, everybody knows that the undergrads are much smarter than the grads.
Because there's usually some experience to parlay to grad school.
That's right.
Right. Yeah. Right.
The undergrad is just raw intellect. So, we were trying to think of names for our company. We left. We actually did. We're trying to think of things that we had in common. One of this was Penn. The main walk through the University of Pennsylvania campus called the Locust Walk, of the beautiful locust trees. But when we thought of the name Locust Capital, we thought it had bad biblical identity. So drop the T and it means place in Latin. Love it.
That's really
make
funny.
It plural because we invest in places. Right?
That's wonderful. Yeah. Is that a common question for you?
It is a question we get all the time.
Yeah.
It's also just a name that nobody pronounces properly. It's Loci, Loci, Loci.
Right.
Even people that have been investing with us now for 3 years still just regularly get the name wrong, which is endearing to me. I don't correct them.
That's right. I had a guy in college call me John for 2 straight years, and I thought it was awesome. I was like, this is so much fun for me. That's great. All right, so tell us about Loci. What do you guys do?
Loci is it's a real estate focused investment firm. We manage money for high net worth individuals, institutions, anybody who wants to invest in real estate assets through the private markets, meaning not through GIPR, publicly traded markets. We raise capital in a series of funds. Those funds have a finite life and are closed end. And that means that we raise a set amount of capital, and once we're done raising that, you can't put more capital in. And then they have a finite life, meaning if you invest in those funds, you have to get your money back in a certain number of years. It's usually 10 years is kind of a standard.
And not early either.
What do you mean?
There's not an optionality to come out early.
There's it's your money's locked up. So that for an investor, that's a tough thing to think through. Do I want to really do that? Lock my money up for possibly a decade. Which has good and bad components to it. Obviously, the illiquidity is one of the bad ones. The good is liquidity can sometimes, be a double-edged sword in that you're more likely to act irrationally by just trading things. But it's so our goal is to invest money for our fund shareholders, our investors, and do a better job delivering them returns than they should be able to get through other assets and things available to them.
Yeah, so clearly we have a long-term outlook. I constantly talk about it. It's in our name. We have this generational outlook, but we do have that liquidity.
You have a liquidity.
And so it's up to the shareholder whether or not they adhere to our principles of long-term investing or not. They have the option to not. But our thinking is long term, just like you.
And look, for a publicly traded company, that's I I think making sure people understand your thinking is very important over the long run, because you want to develop a shareholder base that's aligned. I mean, I read Buffett. One of the reasons Buffett writes all his shareholder letters is he is specifically focused on attracting shareholders who aren't going to just constantly churn through the stock.
That's right. I've owned Berkshire stock. I don't even know how many decades now. I like barely look at it.
Yeah,
I'm like,
that's the
I'm
idea.
just gonna have this.
It's just going to go up.
Right. Right. You keep doing what you do, and myself later in life and my children will really be happy with you.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
We don't have quite the same structure, so we can't behave in quite the same way. Trying to figure it out.
So why Tampa, Florida? Like, I know you're from here.
Yeah.
But you've spent time in the Northeast like you're supposed to, right? I'm being facetious. But you could be in New York. You could be, because your internship was in New York, right?
Yeah.
JP Morgan, right? Yeah. So you've been to New York, you've been to Philly, you've been to DC, you haven't hit Boston, but kind of LA and
we have a partner who lives in Boston, though.
Yeah, right. So how do you raise a fairly substantial sized real estate private equity fund in Tampa, Florida? What's that?
Many hours of Zoom calls and meetings and phone calls. I'd say that's from a capital raising standpoint, being based in Tampa is a severe challenge. It's a decent sized market at 3 million people, and it's decently wealthy, but in comparison to the money centers of DC and New York and San Francisco and LA and Chicago, Boston, it's just nowhere close. So that has just been a challenge. So to answer the question of how, it's just elbow grease, right? Just keep going.
When people ask you that, like the compulsory question to the beginning of a conversation, Teams call, Zoom call, phone call, do people use phones anymore? Right. Occasionally. Is, so where are you? Right.
Where are you located?
And then the next one is like, you have to give a weather report, right?
Right.
Oh, it's
beautiful.
Yeah, right. It's a little,
not right now.
Right. And then, when you're talking to people in the more traditional markets, the more traditional finance markets, what's their reaction when you say Tampa?
Oh, so that has changed over the years.
Yeah.
And really in the last 3 years, it is, it's become not just jealousy over weather, but really, wow, that market's great. That thing is on fire. I hear great things about Tampa, which is funny because I moved back to Tampa in 2015, even though I'm still working for the same company. And before that, I had pitched some stuff in Tampa, in the Tampa Bay area or Orlando, just the kind of the I-4, I-75 corridor, to people who are focused and based in the Northeast. And they were generally, that's a tertiary market. There's not a lot of demand. We don't want to be there. And
that's right.
Now it's totally inverted.
Right.
We want to be there. That's where everybody's moving. Like, it's really the same population growth trend line that as it was 10 years ago. I don't know why you're acting like it's different, but it's just fascinating how kind of sentiment changes with maybe a Super Bowl win or something.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
I think you're being a little bit of a diplomat right now. Like, I typically get made fun of, right?
Yeah.
Like, I can't believe you live in Tampa, right? Like you
definitely get all of that.
Right. But I can emphatically say that some of my closest friends who have known forever, who went the big city route to, make their fortunes, are all leaving.
Yeah. My brother,
right.
It's funny. I keep bringing up my brother. I'll have to play this for him. So he recently left and started his own company as well. And he was an investment banker for the last 25 years. And he opened an office here in Tampa.
Oh,
so
wow.
He's got his New York office with his New York team, but he's got an office here in Tampa as well. And he actually convinced a few people to come down with him.
That's wonderful. I read a book one time called The Outsiders, and not the ones with Tom Cruise and who are the other famous actors. But it's about the top 9, I think it was the top 9 highest performing CEOs over a period of time.
Capital cities.
Yes. All right. So, Warren Buffett, Meg,
Meg Whitman.
Whitman, thank you. And only one of the top 9 of the CEOs lived in New York.
Yeah.
And the one who did had like an office space in the back of an industrial building in Queens. It wasn't in the tower.
It wasn't about the sexiest
right.
place.
Right. And it was everyone outside of New York, because the thesis was you are not distracted. You know, you don't have the pressure of the lifestyle that the big cities kind of bring, so they stay away from New York. Now, easy for us to say as an outsider, no pun intended, but they were quantifying their performance by not being in New York and not adhering to the pressures of the kind of big city mantra.
Yeah. Well, certainly we're all subject to persuasion, influence.
Right.
So, who your peer set is on the weekend, during the week, on the phone, on the Zoom, has an effect on how you think about anything. And so the more time you spend in Manhattan, where everybody's just churn, maybe you're more likely to churn. So for Buffett's at least position, the lack of churn is part of his at least stated reason for why he's been successful.
Yeah. Let's talk about our relationship.
Sure.
And it's typically very platonic at this point.
Certainly not romantic.
But I'm interested to hear your take on how you and I know each other.
My take. So I have known of you for a decade plus. I remember reading and hearing about when you started the company. And I'd always been interested in meeting you. And I'm kind of shocked that it didn't come up sooner.
I'm shocked too. I've never heard that from you before.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, you were in business with somebody who's a very good friend of mine who hired to do a lot of business for us over the years. And then I guess most recently, the introduction came through a mutual friend who's a banker to both of us. And I don't remember exactly what I said. I said, I just want to meet. Who should I meet in town? And he suggested you. And so we had a meeting in my office building, and chatted through how we think about investing, how we think about investments, how we think about the current market, how we think about growing companies, having exposure to, for lack of a better term, high finance, if you will, and being based in Tampa. I think there's like a kinship to that, because there's just not that many people who really are. There's a cohort, but it's not a ton. And so that's how I guess I'd see our relationship develop.
Yeah. I didn't know that first part at all, that you had heard of me. It's very flattering coming from you.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that to flatter you. It really is very flattering. And to put a little more context to things. So I have a similar story about how we met. This mutual banker friend is an actual banker friend. He lends money to people, not investment banking. Right. And I had to discern that. Yes. I had to discern that over the last several years, because I didn't know the difference.
IBD is a little different.
And so he's one of my close friends, and he's, just one of the most outstanding people I know on the planet. And he calls me up and he said, listen, I got this guy who calls me. He's like interested in net lease deals. Here's his number or his email or something like that. Yeah. And that's all I got from him.
Oh, really?
Yeah, literally, that was it. And I was like, okay, it's my job as a CEO to follow up on these things. And I trust this person. Yeah. We have a core value at our company to be relational, and not to have these contrived relationships, but like to genuinely be interested in that person's life. And how do you make that person's life better? And to generate a true relationship. Now it's up to them whether or not they want to be friends with you or not, right? But ultimately, like every interaction we have is to be relational. So if this banker friend is saying, here's an opportunity to be relational with someone, I'm going to take advantage of that. And
check it out.
Yeah. So and then the meeting in your office, I think we need to add more context to that, because I'm pretty sure you were in a t-shirt. Were you in a t-shirt that day?
Yeah. I dressed up for you.
Right. There's a collared shirt. We're on camera. Right. So when there's no cameras around, there's just t-shirts. And I had my uniform on, which is button-down shirt and Costco pants.
You were a properly dressed business person.
Right. And we didn't meet in like your tower office building. We met in the lobby.
Yeah.
Right.
But I didn't realize I was that weird. But in retrospect, I'm getting a sense.
Right.
Sorry.
Right. And you're right. We just were able to communicate on the exact same level.
Yeah.
In my opinion, we adhered to many of the same philosophies, positives and negatives to our respective industries, learning about each other, how our paths haven't crossed, which we were kind of very parallel for most of our kind of Florida real estate careers, and national, I would say, in some capacities. So that relational aspect is, very important to us. And I think, the genesis of what we're going to kind of get into today. So I've teed it up for you.
Tee it up.
All right. So we're a public company. We're transparent. It's important for people to know why we know each other and maybe what we just worked on together.
Yeah.
So I'll let you start that off, and then I'll add to that.
The why we know each other, or
Yes.
what we just worked on?
What we just worked on. Yeah.
Yeah. After we had the meeting, we said that maybe there's ways for us to do business together. And I believe you called me maybe a week later and said you had a transaction that you were working on.
It was secret at this time.
Yes.
Right?
And now I do have the benefit from my previous experience working on publicly traded deals, and knowing how important it is to be quiet around that. And dealing with MNPI is something that
material, non-public information. Yes.
Yeah, so you had a secret deal. You're a public company. That was a public company. I needed to be able to investigate it. Everybody in the office immediately was told, we have a secret deal, MNPI, be very careful with what you're doing.
And there's documents. There's NDAs,
there's confidentiality agreements and all this that kind of paper up. But just beyond the paper, it's important to just respect that.
Yes.
And you had an investment that you were looking to capitalize. You're aware of the difficulty of capitalizing anything today, especially in the context of the public markets.
We're going to timestamp this in case it's sent out. So we're in August of 23 right now. Yeah. We started talking in May of 23.
Yeah. Yeah. And you asked if we'd be interested in providing capital, and we said sure. So sign an NDA, sign a confidentiality agreement, and then we started investigating the assets and determined whether or not we would be willing to provide capital for them. And I think that's kind of the base of it, right? Did I skip something?
It really was that simple.
Yeah, it was fast.
It was fast for sure. I'm not going to take away from that. But the simplicity of our discussions was refreshing to me. It was the ability to have these like honest, transparent conversations with someone, not just of like mind, but who is genuinely interested in getting to the bottom of things. You are going to protect your investors.
100%.
Yeah, you are going to make sure that you can quantify every aspect of what you're doing and saying and reporting to your investors. And we wanted to be helpful in that process.
You all were great.
Yeah.
You were an obstructionist.
Right.
and look, sometimes you run into people who are obstructionists. And I often think that you learn about people most in two phases of a business relationship. Phase one is the initial deal negotiation. The sharper the elbow, the more selfish the behavior, the more I'm worried about my business relationship going forward. And then the second point is when things go bad, right? When something goes badly, something breaks down, how people behave in those scenarios is the other way. You really learn who you're in business with. And those front end negotiations are really, I think, the only signal into how somebody might behave when they are not fully aligned with you, which sometimes happens with business when things go wrong in the deal. So yeah, that dealing with y'all was great from that standpoint. We seek to do business with people we think are, honest and competent. And we don't hand out those two words lightly.
Wow. So we tricked another one. Good
Yeah,
job. Yeah.
tricked me.
Good job. So I'm really interested in hearing about your diligence process, if you're willing to say. So
Sure.
there's deal diligence.
Yes.
There's corporate diligence.
Yes.
And then there's, I would just call it personal diligence.
Yeah.
Who are we working with?
Yeah, who we working with?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So discuss
So
those.
who we working with, we came from somebody who I have faith in and somebody who's already been in business with you. So you get character witnesses, and the best character witnesses to get are those who've been through the two things that I just mentioned, through deal negotiation and then been through any kind of market disruption or when things go badly. And so I did, you have a good reputation on town just generally, but I went specifically to people who worked with you and I heard good things from those people. Just really hammering home around the forthright and fiduciary elements that ultimately, I care more about than
You've disclosed some of those people, and I think you haven't disclosed some of those people, and like by design almost. And I'm totally cool with that. Yeah. But the people that you've disclosed to me, I've literally known for sometimes decades, multiple decades.
Yes.
Yeah. And I always tell myself okay, I'm just being myself. Yeah. But look how important it is.
Reputation is huge in life.
Right. To just not be a ding dong ever.
Yeah. Right. Or at least in our business, in every way ever. I mean, maybe there's some people who can get away with being a ding dong and they still win.
Right.
They still are able to do well in life. Now, maybe they're not doing so well in life in their personal relationships, but
that's right.
I in my career, I haven't, in really anything, going all the way back to childhood sports, learning to work with people, and then seeking out people that are with whom you can work has been two extremely important components of any success I've had.
Cool.
Our ability to work through tough times.
So, what does the corporate diligence entail? What is the deal diligence entail?
Well, the corporate diligence is mostly just reading your 10Ks, trying to get an understanding of your financial structure, see whether or not what we're talking about could put you in a position that we wouldn't want you to be in. We're very concerned with being in business with people who are being business. The fact of doing business with us actually makes their situation worse, or they end up doing too many things. We have a lot of people who just want to do every deal, and frankly, we don't want to give money for every deal because they just don't have the capacity. Right. So there's a lot of different ways to do a lot of different components of corporate due diligence. Might do 2 deals with somebody, but not 5 because they have capacity for 2. The other side of it is we love to look at your underwriting, how you think about it. We went through every deal with you. We said, kind of, tell us why you want to own this.
So I need to disclose something to you. Yeah. So our asset diligence call, there was many diligence calls. Yeah. The asset diligence call, I was in a place, I can't believe I'm saying this. I was in a place that wasn't a traditional office setting, which, today it's not that big a deal. So I think I said my video wasn't working.
Yeah. It was working fine.
Totally working fine. I'm so sorry, but I made sure I was very engaged, and I was the primary speaker on that call, so I couldn't really go anywhere. But I literally had to go into a garage and sit on a cooler. And there's a picture of this, and my laptop's resting on a garbage can. So I'll send you the picture now that our deal is done, and you won't think poorly of me.
I didn't think poorly of you in the moment. Yeah,
but I needed to make sure that you understood how much I knew about the deals.
Yeah, we wanted to see that.
And sometimes I didn't give you great feedback about all the deals. Remember, I would say okay, here's the challenge in this asset, right? And so we're on top of that challenge, and we're making sure we get ahead of that. And you always took very diligent notes, and you would come back to me and you're like, okay, 3 weeks ago you said this about your property, what's your response to it now?
Yeah.
Right? And I was like, this guy pays attention,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
He's not just checking the box with, let's do a diligence call, right?
No, not at all.
Right.
We also, I guess I learned this from Wharton. Wharton, they taught us that you shouldn't do this thing called brainstorming.
You ever heard of it?
Yeah. You should do something called brain writing, is what they call it. And so what that was, when you have people who are trying to come together and create a project or an idea or to investigate stuff, they want them, their suggestion was to have everybody work fully independent first, do an own analysis without any kind of risk of bias kind of leaking in, and then come together and discuss. So we do that on our deals to the extent that it's possible. It's not always that easy, but we try to independently analyze stuff. So with everything that you sent us, we had done our own work. It might have been somewhat preliminary, but we want to do our own valuations, think through every bit. If you give us comps, we want to try to find the comps that you didn't find. And that's just, I've made so many mistakes. I keep making mistakes. How do I stop making mistakes?
Right. Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify.
Trust but verify.
Right.
Yes, with respect to the Russians.
Yeah.
So trust but verify is absolutely a key to doing. But look, we give people money for everything, right? You can't give people money without verifying.
Right. Okay. I'm going to ask your permission now, and we can edit this out, or you can just say no, and we'll keep it in. All right. So you sent me a text message last week, or the week before. Would you mind if I read that text message here? Okay. Sure. No? Okay, good. It says,
I don't remember what I said exactly.
All right. All right. We can edit if you don't like it. Dave, thinking about your company. Do you have any business leaders, investors, philosophers you've studied that guide your decision-making at GIPR? ?
Yeah.
That was the full body of the text. So I read this and I was like, I'm so excited to have another nerd, right? like you're not doing diligence anymore, right? Our deal was done as of last week. Yeah. And I knew that you were genuinely interested in hearing how I thought and what drove me and what influenced me. And do you mind if we have a discussion about this?
Do it. I bought 3 of the books you just told me that you.
Is that right? Okay, so now I have to go and talk about the books that I recommended.
You don't have to.
So I responded in an email because texting was too small, and I responded with, "I'm filing my disclaimer now. This is Nerd City, right?
All right, nerded out.
Yeah. Allegory of the Cave by Plato.
Yeah.
Like, you can't get nerdier than that. You know, it's a 500-year-old book, right? Extreme Ownership. Why Should White Guys Have All the Fun? Reginald Lewis. Blue Fishing. Shoe Dog by Phil Knight. Play Nice But Win, Michael Dell. Everybody Matters, Bob Chapman. Am I Being Too Subtle? Sam Zell. What It Takes, Steve Schwarzman. Anti-Fragile, Nassim Taleb. Yep. So that was my book list. And then I do a little narrative here. Of course, I read Warren Buffett's, his letters every year. There's books that have been made just on his, reprinting his shareholder letters.
80% through one of them right now.
Is it? Oh, it's a great read. I talked about Abraham. I talk about Jesus. And then at the end, I say, I try not to sensationalize people because invariably I'm disappointed in people because they do.
Man, we're human.
Right. Exactly right. Because we do or say something wrong. It doesn't mean it's intentionally all the time. Yeah. Sometimes it is. But I like reading these books. I like learning from these people, but realizing that we're all just people. So do you remember what your response was?
No.
No idea.
I have some of it. The whole thing. I can't remember exactly what it was.
You said,
I know that I told you some of the books I had read.
so you said, here's my personal list.
Okay.
Buffett's Letters,
Yeah.
Thinking Fast and Slow.
Yeah. Damn
Great
Kahneman.
book.
Yeah.
Great book. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Yeah,
When I saw that, I was like, this guy's on it, because I read that. That's an old book.
Yeah. It's an
Is
old
that
book.
30 years old?
It might be older than that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great
It's definitely
book.
the 90s. Early
Right.
90s.
And then Status Games.
Status Games.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm always biased by what I read recently.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you and I clearly read a lot,
Yeah.
and we read what I would deem to be thoughtful books, deeper books. So talk about that portion of your personality.
Yeah. It's funny. My kids have been doing summer reading, and man, do they not like it.
Right.
They're done with it. I don't know what really clicked or changed. I think most of this began when I started realizing in life that I had to learn to be able to do what I wanted to do. I had to get ahead. So I started reading. I mentioned I read a book while surfing, and that book influenced me.
Right.
I had also read Crime and Punishment while I was surfing. So I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki, which is
That's good.
very,
Compulsory
very
reading.
basic book.
Yeah.
But,
Right.
and then I read Crime and Punishment. It was interesting. But yeah, so I don't know. Over time, I've just developed this habit of trying to learn through reading, and it's really accelerated in the last 10 years as I've become a father and a husband and working on trying to be a better person, because I'm not always the best at that. And then also on the investment side, and learning how to think about the world and how it works so that I can make fewer mistakes in investing. And then also on the corporate side, working with partners and teammates. And as I age through life, I have more and more people that work for me rather than me working for a bunch of people. So it's going through that shift is the reading has been helpful. A lot of the stuff is not helpful, but even the not helpful stuff there's value in seeing there's a different perspective out there.
So your title's managing partner, but you're really the CEO.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so CEOs I've read, and now we're 2 CEOs talking to each other, is a lonely job.
Yeah.
Right. Because everyone thinks you have every answer.
Yeah.
So that goes from the people on your team who you're leading.
I think the people on my team know that I don't have it, but they still ask. Right.
Right. They appease you. Right.
They let me think.
Right. That's right. And so the constant lifelong learning is imperative because you fill in the blank.
It's lifelong learning is imperative because the challenges keep changing.
Yeah.
Every week there's some new complexity, some new person that's wandered in or out of my life, just a new set of circumstances to deal with, from aging parents and life versus when I was the kid dealing with children and through different stages. I was just talking to Emily Cusmano here in your office about
our chief of staff,
younger.
Right.
And her kids, I think 3 and 5, and mine are 15, 13, and 9. It's just the difference between a 5-year-old and a 15-year-old. Both can be tiring. One is much more intellectually challenging, I feel like. And so, the learning is helping me figure out how to make better decisions. I think it comes down to that. My opinion on happiness and ability to keep people around you happy as well. In life, personal happiness and the happiness of those around you really comes down to your decision-making ability. And my decision-making ability started off in life terrible and has gotten progressively better. And that's from a combination of experience and trying to learn from those experiences and just reading about other people's experiences.
Yeah, males' brains don't fully form until much later.
Still forming, maybe.
Right. Right. That's right. Okay. Speed round. You ready for some questions?
Yeah, fire.
Okay. Speaking of books, what's your favorite book?
My favorite book is Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman.
Yeah.
That was maybe the most disruptive book I've ever read.
Highly recommended to everyone. We'll nerd out later on that.
Yeah.
What was your very first job? And like, doing chores around the house doesn't count.
With somebody with whom I wasn't related.
Correct.
Candy striping. So I did discharge at a Morton Plant hospital, or I would go and somebody was being discharged from the hospital. I would pick them up in a wheelchair and I'd walk them down and I'd chat them up and stuff like that.
That's a great job.
Yeah.
It forces you to talk to someone.
Yes. Also people who are inevitably relative to a 14-year-old, much older and in worse health conditions. So, there's a little bit of, this is coming for all of us. Be empathetic.
Yeah. Good one. That's good. Introvert or extrovert?
Oh, geez, that just swings depending on who I'm hanging out with. I'd say if it's on a spectrum, I'm more introverted.
Yeah. Analytical or creative?
I'd unfortunately fall into the more analytical category and try to surround myself with people who are creative.
What would someone say is weird about you?
My kids say that my reading habits are weird. I wake up at 5 and read every day, and we watch TV and I read while they watch TV.
Right.
Maybe that.
That is pretty weird. Yeah.
I actually have it in my calendar at 5 a.m. every morning. It says personal reading time.
Yeah. Are you addicted to your calendar? I am.
No, I'm not addicted to it.
Yeah.
I plugged it into my calendar because I wanted to remind myself that this is something important.
Yeah.
Make time for it. I don't always make time for it. I skip my personal things all the time, but having them in there, I'm more likely to do them.
Yeah, good. Who inspires you?
My wife inspires me. She's very hardworking and doesn't get the public credit of being very hardworking.
Mm-hmm. Good one. Yeah, you're definitely sleeping in the same bed tonight.
Yeah.
Nice work.
Make sure she hears this.
If your life was a country song, what would it be titled?
Patience.
What social media platforms do you admit to using?
To admit to using, I've started using Twitter about 1.5 years ago, 2 years ago, maybe. I have Instagram and LinkedIn.
Okay.
The ones that I use are probably Twitter and LinkedIn.
Okay, got it. What movie would you recommend?
There's a movie I recommend. I think Margin Call. If you're interested in our business a little bit.
Yeah.
And that it gives you an idea of how cutthroat it can be.
Mm-hmm. I forgot about that one. Yeah. Harsh. Yeah. Right.
Really unhappy people with a lot of power and money behind them.
That's
sometimes.
right. What's another podcast you listen to?
I listen to Invest with the Best. I listen to Ted Saide's one, Capital Allocators.
Mm-hmm.
I listen to the All In podcast. I listen to Sam Harris. I listen to who was I listening to? Another guy. I'm having a mental block on his name. Anyway, it's kind of loops around depending on my mood.
All business related.
Business, politics, philosophy.
Yeah, good. What is one question you wish I'd ask you, and how would you answer?
One question you wish I...
Like you were sweating coming in here. You're like, I hope he asks me. Like, what's your bench?
What's your bench? I don't know. I can do a push-up.
Right.
I don't know. Maybe why? Because here's maybe something. Why did I leave my old firm to start this firm?
So how would you answer?
The Patton, I probably shouldn't answer. I was going to say Pat and I, we probably
That's your partner.
Different, yeah, Pat, we had different reasons for leaving. My primary reason for leaving was, to align our investments a little bit more closely with our philosophy of investing.
Mm-hmm.
I was working with very bright, very talented, very resourceful, very good people. In fact, the people at that firm were incredibly magnanimous with us when we left. specifically the CEO. But we had different visions on I think where we wanted to put capital in certain cases. And I really like the idea of trying to build something in Tampa. I would love for Tampa to continue to grow as a city and become more worldly and more aware of the what's going on beyond the beach and the redfish.
Yeah. Well, you're clearly doing that. And that phrase has been used on me too, building a company in Tampa in a nationally kind of breadth of a company in Tampa. So congratulations. You're already doing it.
Same to you.
Michael Phillips, managing partner and co-founder of Loci Capital. Thank you very much for being here. We are just thrilled to not only have you on today, but to truly be a partner with you. It is all our pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
Great.